Hello YouTube. Try to ignore the background noise you might hear from like a cage rattling. It's my chinchilla bouncing around in her cage. So the topic of this video is going to be on a guide on how to argue. I've noticed a lot lately that the internet's kind of slipped behind on their ability to stay on topic and not use insults and things of that nature. So I found it kind of necessary to actually make a guide on at least how I argue, or at least the way I view people should be arguing. So it's a 4-step guide, actually. It's very simple. It's not complicated if you just read the steps individually, not all of the stuff surrounding it, like the definitions of different terms and whatnot. But outside of that, let's get straight into it. Step 1 is to let go of all preconceived ideologies and emotional attachments to an argument or belief. So this is the hardest step. It's the hardest step because it's hard to acknowledge personal biases at every turn very actively. People really want to cling to a set of beliefs and ideologies and things like that, things that are what I'd consider to be the trappings of identity politics. And it takes a great deal of practice and acceptance to learn when it's appropriate to stand your ground or walk away. It's absurd that people in today's society have kind of fallen into the same kind of ideological loop that we've seen historically happen time and time again. Step 2 is to adhere strictly as you can to argumentation theory. Now, what is argumentation theory? It's the interdisciplinary study of how conclusions can be reached through logical reasoning. That is, claims based soundly or not on premises. It includes the arts and sciences of civil debate, dialogue, conversation, and persuasion. It studies the rules of inference, logic, and procedural rules in both artificial and real-world settings. So some critical components of argumentation theory are understanding and identifying arguments, either explicit or implied, and the goals of the participants in the different types of dialogue. Identifying the premises of which conclusions are derived, establishing the burden of proof in determining who made the initial claim and is thus responsible for providing evidence why his or her position merits acceptance, and for the one carrying the burden of proof, the advocate to marshal for his or her position to convince or force the opponent's acceptance. The method by which this is accomplished is producing valid, sound, and compelling arguments, devoid of weakness and not easily attacked. In a debate, the fulfillment of the burden of proof creates a burden of rejoinder. One must try to identify faulty reasoning in an opponent's argument, attack the reasons and premises of the argument, and to provide counterexamples if possible, to identify any fallacies, and to show why a valid conclusion cannot be derived from the reasons provided for his or her argument. Blah. So, the reasoning behind adhering to argumentation theory is quite simple. It's kind of self-explanatory with kind of the definition of what argumentation theory is. It's essentially just a basic bare-bones guideline. You can see a lot of people online kind of follow a chopped up structural version of it that doesn't necessarily actually kind of defend their point. I've seen a lot of people online like citing the criminality statistics or citing like the widening political divide and things like that to kind of cause controversy for controversy's sake without actually stating any solutions or giving a reasoning behind why they're just out of nowhere using those statistics. But ultimately extremely important that you kind of follow this motion so that way the conversation, the argument can go smoothly without any hiccups or derailing. Step 3 is to be intellectually honest. Intellectual honesty is an applied method of problem solving characterized by an unbiased, honest attitude which can be demonstrated in several ways. One's faith or lack of faith or politics do not interfere with the pursuit of truth. Relevant facts and information are not purposely omitted, even when such things may contradict one's hypothesis. Facts are presented in an unbiased manner and not twisted to give misleading impressions or to support one view over another. References or earlier work are acknowledged when or where possible, and plagiarism is avoided. So intellectual honesty essentially just backs up what the other step was, step 2, the adhering to argumentation theory, because purposely omitting information or things like that is one of the weaknesses that can cause your argument to be, picked apart, or will cause it to fall apart and things like that. In the day and age of the internet, everyone has all the time in the world to just sit there and, peel through different Google pages or whatever search engines they decide to use and try and find some sort of fault in your argument or some sort of fault in your reasoning. And it's very difficult for ideas to actually stick, and I believe that's why political polarity has kind of grown and people have become more tribalistic and kind of started to adhere more to like identity politics and groupings of political ideologies. And it's disappointing because ultimately speaking, the individual aspects of different political ideologies can be good. It's just that when coupled with others that are bad, it kind of leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. And step 4 is actually debate with as many people at a time as you can. By having your views peer-reviewed by a mass of people while also getting a feel on how to apply the previous steps is key to becoming more comfortable and fluid with your ability to argue. This is the way I learned how to argue. I decided that I was tired of not knowing how to argue and always being afraid of confrontational things in real life and online that I necessarily didn't know everything behind. So what I did was I went to, I believe it was the Young Turks' YouTube channel. I went to their videos, went down in the description, and just decided to troll as much as I could, to start making wild accusations and wild statements that honestly didn't make any sense, and tried to convince others that I was correct. Of course, I didn't use my actual face or my name or anything like that. I did it under the guise of total anonymity, and that kind of relieved a lot of the pressure. What ended up resulting was I actually got into a discussion with a guy that linked me out to the philosophical aspects of arguing, and kind of this whole step-by-step procedural process on how to actually structure a proper argument. And it's the reason why I feel like I'm a better person today than I was back then. It's also the reason why I consider myself to be a radical centrist, why I consider myself to be a libertarian, or at least a civil libertarian, not an anarchical one. And it's done a lot of good, what that guy showed me how to do, and what dialectical discussion was, and how to actually properly cite fallacies and things like that. And I'm hoping that this guide on how to argue will help at least someone. Now, I'm not going to toot my own horn and say it's going to, because honestly, I'm afraid that political discourse and the polarization of people has grown so exponentially that it's virtually impossible to undo at this point. But yeah, so this was my guide on how to argue. Thank you for watching.